Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the daily discussion for the 2nd of October 2014. If you have any ideas for topics, you can leave them in the comments below, or use the links in the description to contact me. My name is Tuskeh, and today I am joined by a special guest. Welcome to the show, Eleeshan. Say hello.
Hello, folks.
Now, Eleeshan is a very skilled player. I've known him for nearly a year now, probably a little bit more than a year, wouldn't you say?
Somewhere around that time frame, yes.
Yes, and we've raided together for quite a while. He's a very, very skilled player, and he's done a little bit of every role in the past.
I have rated top tier and multiple expansions across every role, so, yeah.
Yes, so basically he's smarter than me. So this should be very informative, this daily discussion. So today we shall be discussing an email that I received from a very nice fellow named Henrik, or Henrik, however you say it. And in it he said, could you talk about tanking now and in Warlords of Draenor? The whole vengeance thing, and how you feel it will affect tanking. To be honest, I didn't learn about vengeance until very recently when I ran LFR Throne of Thunder, and the off-tank wouldn't let me have aggro on anything. So maybe talk about how vengeance works and how it affects playstyles versus how it will be in Warlords of Draenor. So, I think before we talk about the changes to Vengeance and what exactly kind of playstyles it promotes, we should talk about what Vengeance actually is, because as far as I'm aware, Vengeance was introduced in Cataclysm to help tanks keep threat when damage dealers would get more and more gear throughout an expansion, because the problem would be the damage dealers get more gear, and they just start doing so much damage that the tanks can't keep up with threat.
Exactly. They had built Vengeance as a tool to allow for continued expansion or continued DPS growth throughout the expansion. The problem was it just became an awful, awful thing because it was easily abused.
Exactly, that's the main problem with Vengeance, because, just in case you don't know, the more damage you take as a tank, you get a percentage of it in return as a stacking attack power buff. So the more damage you take, the more damage you deal in return, which is a problem when the second you hear about it, you think, well, then surely tanks will want to take more damage to deal more damage, because having bigger numbers is fun.
Yeah, that is the main thing. There are a lot of tanks that are in a mentality where they like to take excess damage, put more strain on the healers, make their jobs harder in order to make themselves feel better. It promotes a very selfish mindset within a raid, which is never a positive thing.
Yes, and really, I wouldn't say it's a massive problem in looking for raid, because really the damage isn't so high, especially, I mean, today in Siege of Orgrimmar gear, where people have got flex gear, it's been upgraded 4 times rather than 2. Really, pretty much anyone in an LFR that's got LFR gear probably outgears it, so pretty much any LFR you can one-tank. There may be a couple of exceptions, but really you can almost one-tank everything, and that is kind of a problem. But as you said, it gets even worse in raids, because a kind of a fad that's come around called Vengeance Whoring is kind of been circulating World of Warcraft recently, where tanks just try and take more damage to deal more damage.
Yeah, it changes the entire dynamic of a fight potential. Plus, when you couple that with certain healing things like Disc Priests, the overpoweredness that they are, have been able to help promote this just because they've been able to prevent so much damage. But even though it hits the absorb, the tank still gets the Vengeance buff. So when you couple those things, you end up with tanks that in a group with a good Disc Priest can just stand in all the fire and throw out all the DPS, and then when they get put in any other circumstance, they explode and start blaming other people, not realizing that they're the problem.
Right, and I don't think it's really fair to blame players for this mindset, because Blizzard has given them the tools to do this, and really they've promoted it, not only in terms of the Disc Priest. I mean, they have said they've allowed the Discipline Priest to get out of control, but I think a good example of Blizzard's mentality with Vengeance in Mists of Pandaria is challenge modes, because challenge modes are very fast. If you want to do gold challenge modes, you have to mass pull, you have to have really high AoE DPS, and you just need really strong players. And because of the gear cap, because your gear gets scaled down, tanks become really powerful, because they have to take loads of damage. They have to. They just have to mass pull. They have to mass pull and take loads of damage, which gives them loads of vengeance, which means that tanks, more often than not, will be first or second on the damage meters while doing a challenge mode. And without that tank's DPS, a gold challenge mode run would become next to impossible. And that really kind of shows Blizzard's mentality towards vengeance in that in Mists of Pandaria, they just kind of accepted it.
Yeah, and I don't really think nothing about it at all really builds a healthy coercion with a group. It causes people to make decisions that under normal circumstances or any circumstances not involving vengeance are just bad. It is a bad decision to stand in the big cleave, except, when you're a tank, all of a sudden that means you hit harder, you can get the boss down. Sure, it makes the healer have to struggle a bit more, but that's his problem. And that's just making your problem someone else's problem is never beneficial when you're looking at a group aspect.
Right, yeah, I completely agree. And like I said earlier, Blizzard has kind of allowed tanks to do this for quite a while, and they are taking this away in a certain kind of way in Warlords of Draenor. I mean, Resolve, which is their answer, has a few issues that I think could be potentially problematic, but we'll talk about that in a bit. I want to stay on Vengeance for now because, like I said, the playstyle has really changed. I mean, I watch a lot of Mike preach WoW, and if you don't, then you really should. I'll put a link to his channel in the description below. And he talked a lot about how Vengeance whoring tanks, and this has become an actual mentality in a lot of players' minds, especially a lot of players that weren't around before Cataclysm or Mr. Pandaria. Their whole idea, their mentality behind it is, I am a DPS so that attacks from in front rather than behind the boss.
I've met several people that had that thought process.
I know we have someone in our raid that thinks like that. Takeo.
Oh, silly Takeo, you're so pretty. That's...
One more thing about Vengeance I think is going to be a problem is that it's promoted a mindset which is pull all the things, you know, especially in a 5-man, because Mr. Pandaria 5-mans are just a joke. They really are. If you have any kind of semblance of gear, you enter a 5-man and any single person in that group can solo it. So I mean, it's kind of built a problem in mentality with tanks in that I pull everything and I can just AoE tank them all down. And from what I've heard about Warlords of Draenor, you do that, you are going to explode very fast.
Exactly. One of the things that I have seen, all the information I've gathered about the 5-mans and the heroics and Warlords of Draenor is that they are supporting personal responsibility. Even though you are a DPS, your job is not just to kill the mobs, your job is to kill the mobs and prevent them from doing certain things. You need to silence the right spell, not just every spell that comes out. You need to make sure you are standing in the right place, attacking the right mob first, using the correct CC. Now, from what I've heard, it's not going to be quite as heartless as the beginning Cataclysm heroics were, which is a good thing. I think perhaps they overcorrected a bit whenever they released those, but we need more than what we have in mob, because it is a joke. It feels like I am out in the world just killing solo mobs out in Dreadwaste. It's laughable.
It really is. And I mean, part of that is because we're in the last tier of the expansion, and Blizzard always kind of ups the stats and the item level of the gear a little bit to have that kind of final burst of power near the end of an expansion. And that has kind of thrown things out of the window a little bit. But, I mean, Mr. Pandaria 5-mans were really bloody easy from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, they completely nullified the idea of heroic mode being something heroic, because whenever we hit 90, it opened up most of the quote-unquote heroic dungeons. They were basically just normal dungeons under a normal name, because there were dungeons that were not available prior to then. They were heroic only. And that seems counterintuitive to the whole idea of doing something heroic. They threw their entire mentality and the original concept of the heroic dungeon out the window, and they did it in favor of attempting to mix it up with the scenarios, which on paper sounded fine, but in practice, nobody liked it.
Right, I mean, I think a big part of the scenario, and we're kind of going a little bit off topic, but that's fine. I think the problem with scenarios is that they're also really easy as well. I mean, the scenarios, they aren't hard. Even the heroic scenarios aren't that bad. There are a couple of mechanics that can be problematic, but as long as you have someone that knows when to interrupt or something like that, it's fine. But I think that Blizzard was probably going to go for have those scenarios, kind of test them out and get loads of people involved in them. And if they could do that, they could then allow the heroics to kind of drift back towards what they were, towards Burning Crusade, which was they were for raiders. That's what... That's, again, preach. I quote that guy because he is a god amongst this kind of thing, in my opinion, because he was right. When there were attunements in Burning Crusade, if you wanted to raid, you had to do loads of 5-man heroics, and they were bloody hard. They really were. Much harder than the Cataclysm heroics. You could argue that they were as hard, if not harder, than challenge modes.
Yeah, they were pretty tough, and they required specific group dynamics and people to respond and act accordingly and not take as little damage as possible. Mentalities that we just don't breed with the way it's set up right now, like the tanking issue. And that is another thing to look into with the upcoming Warlords of Draenor, because they are putting so much of a focus on everyone having specific roles. There are a lot of people that tank right now that are going to go into Warlords because they've only tanked in MOP, or they have primarily tanked in MOP. Their entire world is going to get turned upside down, and it's going to put a lot of people off. They're going to think, well, this is no fun anymore. I can't do all this neat stuff. You can. You just need to be more controlled and more efficient about it. You have to actually worry about your incoming damage and how you move things.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's going to be a really big thing. And it's pretty easy to say that a lot of tanks are going to be going away from the role come Warlords of Draenor, because it's going to be much more tactical, because like you just said, you're going to have to control your damage a lot. I mean, from the previews that I've seen about the Brewmaster monk, for instance, and Ellie does main a Windwalker monk, and he does occasionally go Brewmaster to help us in 3 tank fights. So he has a little bit of experience and he knows the Brewmaster. The stagger mechanic, apparently, even if you have a light stagger in a Warlords 5-man heroic, it can kill you.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely strong mechanic changes in going from MOP to WoD. Not as bad as we have seen going from other expansions to others, but there are a lot of things that people who tank now really are going to want to take notice of and learn about and experiment with. Something also of note is, even though we are losing Vengeance in Warlords, thankfully they're removing it. Their plan is to instead up the base DPS of tank classes in order to partially compensate. They're not trying to totally neuter a tank's DPS in all capacity. I'm fine with a tank doing moderate DPS. I'm not fine with them having the capability to blow equally geared DPS out of the water under the right circumstances.
Right, yes. And this is actually an interesting kind of balance that they have to do, because if you didn't know, tanking has changed dramatically since vanilla, because a vanilla tank was a prop warrior and nothing else, first of all. Only the prop warriors could tank, and their rotation was Sunder Armor. It was literally a one-button kind of roll. You would occasionally throw in another couple of spells if you could, but, I mean, you would just dump your rage into Heroic Strike. But really, the main problem is that was boring. And then it kind of moved away from that towards being a little bit more active, but then it got out of control again towards Mr. Pandaria. So they're trying to find a balance between being strategic and pressing the right buttons, as opposed to just being able to just press a single button and win. Because that's what a lot of tanks can do at the moment. Because, I mean, I leveled the Protection Paladin, and there are times where, you know, I don't even have Vengeance. And I open up a fight with an Avenger's Shield, which bounces between 3 or 4 targets, and it can, like, take off half of their health, just flat. And they're going to be reducing that quite heavily.
And leveling as tanks, it's all broken. The leveling,
yeah, I've got a serious problem with the leveling in World of Warcraft. I really do.
Well, heirlooms have changed the entire game. Because of the heirlooms are so powerful, any new person that does not have them going through the leveling, if it's not this nerf, it's going to be too much for them. And I love my heirlooms, but
maybe we can have a discussion about that in another video, because I will say I've healed, tanked, and DPS'd from like level 15 to 85 without heirlooms, and I've been perfectly fine, and I've still been able to do the massive damage. So that's a discussion for another video. Yeah.
Right.
So
moving back onto the tanks, we're going to want to move into WoD now and talk about
Resolve. Yes.
Okay.
And
go ahead then.
Yes. So Resolve is the basically Blizzard's answer to Vengeance, because Vengeance is, regardless of whether or not people like it, it is a mechanic, and it is a mechanic that tanks kind of have to think about. Kind of. It's there, and like I said before, you can kind of juggle it with taking a bit more damage, and some smart tanks can take just a tiny bit more damage by taking another stack because they trust their healers, but that won't take you all the way. I mean, I will say, for instance, Heroic Iron Juggernaut, the tanks were not thinking about Vengeance during that fight, I will say, but they're going to kind of keep that kind of level of strategic thinking by having that extra mechanic as a tank, but they're going to throw it into Resolve instead, which works kind of similarly. So you take damage and you get Resolve, but this Resolve increases your self-healing as opposed to increasing your damage. So in essence, it increases your survivability by allowing you to heal yourself more. And they are changing quite a few of the classes, like for instance the Warrior. I know that the Warrior struggled a lot with self-healing in Mr. Pandaria because they don't have like a really big strong self-healing ability that they can press a lot, because I know Paladins have their self-heals, Blood Death Knights have their Death Strikes and things like that. I'm not sure about Brewmasters.
We've got a few.
But yeah, I mean, every tank has some form of self-healing. But that is going to be increased if your class doesn't have many of that, so don't worry too much about the balance of self-healing. Let's more focus on Resolve and what it's going to do to change the way you play. I'd like to see what you actually think Resolve is going to do to change the tanking mindset once people have gone through the initial, holy shit, I can't pull everything anymore, and they slowly get used to it. Once that is out of the way, how do you think Resolve is going to change playstyles?
I think Resolve, the benefit of Resolve is that it leaves things within the person's hands. One of my major problems with Vengeance was that utilizing and using that mechanic to its fullest forced responsibility on other people in a group. Resolve, it is a personal thing that does not force responsibility on other people simply because it ups your self-healing. I'm fine with you having to juggle ideas and moves. Do I take this extra damage to have the extra healing for the big burst coming in to help my healer then? or do I just go ahead and avoid as much as possible? Options are not a bad thing. Options that truly hurt the group are. Since it leaves the power within the tank's hand, I personally feel that resolve will work out much better. I think everyone's going to not know what to do with it in the beginning, and as they grow more accustomed to it, they're going to start learning, okay, if I do this at this point, it is not beneficial, but if I wait until a little bit further down and just step in that fire for a moment, then when the big AoE comes in, I can lighten my healer's load significantly.
Right, yeah, and I think actually a good way of describing what you're saying is if you time your resolve correctly, it can basically become a survivability cooldown. So, for instance, let's say Heroic Iron Juggernaut, for instance. The tanks are taking the most damage when they have just got off the boss. They've got 3 or 4 stacks of a really hard-hitting dot, and then they have to take a whole ton of damage from jumping on mines. And that's where we would very often lose a tank. Mostly because they would be in midair, away from the raid, and out of range of the healers, and they would either die in midair, or they would die from the full damage. So let's say you had a resolve. You could take the dot, and the dot is giving you a whole ton of resolve, even when you're off the boss. You jump on the mine, you get reduced to 10% health. While you're in midair, you use your personal survivability cooldown, like, you know, your Enraged Regeneration, or your Eternal Flame, or something like that, and then you go up to 50% health, you land, and the healers can keep you alive. And I think in an organized raid environment, the resolve will help the raid so much more than Vengeance ever did.
Yes, it definitely puts the right tools in the tank's hand, because their ability to kill things should have nothing. Don't get me wrong, tanks need to be able to hurt things and deal damage, and I get that, and I'm fine with that. But their ability to kill things should not be something they focus on. Their job is to watch over the raid, be the guardian that keeps everyone alive, and doing more damage does not help that. Being able to do more personal healing does, and that works with the base tank mentality, or at least the mentality tanks need to have.
Definitely, and I think that this is something that a lot of people miss, but in terms of the whole lore and ideas of the game, look at the specializations, right? You're a protection warrior, you're a protection paladin, you're a guardian druid, and the other ones don't make sense, but that's not my point. My point is that just think of those are some of the classic tank roles: the guardian, the protector. And if you think about any tank in the lore, if you think about any tank in artwork, you see someone with a massive shield or covered in armor protecting people from the fireball or from the massive great big thing. They're not sometimes they'll fight back. They've got a sword in their hand or something, but they're not doing loads of damage. They're not cleaving through skulls. They're holding the line. They cannot be killed. That's the whole point of a tank. Not deal loads of damage. Those are the people in the back lines wearing the mage robes and, you know, the leather and the mail, throwing out lightning bolts and ice lances and arrows, or, you know, in the melee with daggers or a massive great big axe and just going completely berserk without any kind of thought for personal safety. The tanks are the people that hold the line. They don't win the fight, they hold the line.
And it's a pivotal role that we don't currently breed well enough, and I think Resolve will help with that. It's not going to stop people from making poor decisions, but it is going to give them a better idea of the decisions they need to be making.
Yes, and there are a few downsides to Resolve that I can see. I mean, first of all, in something like a 5-man or an LFR, once you start out gearing it a little bit, I'm sure there will still be tanks that can be like, I don't need healers, I can just heal myself through this fight. And I'm sure there are times where that might work, and times where the tank is going to die, and then be like, what the fuck, why didn't you heal me? And really, that mentality is going to be kind of kicked in the head and slowly kind of dragged out of the window as the expansion goes on, because people won't be able to tank like they used to be able to with AoE tanking. But one of the problems I've really seen with Resolve is it might, if Blizzard don't balance it correctly, take away from the healer's role. Like, even in a raid environment, what if, say, for instance, the Protection Paladins, who have become really big self-healers in Mists of Pandaria, that's where a lot of their survivability comes from, is that they can just heal themselves. So let's say you've got a Protection Paladin in a raid or a 5-man, and it's an organized raid or a 5-man, so you've got a coordinated team, and the tank is just like, oh, I can take this burst of damage, just save your cooldowns, healer. I can take this next one, and this next one, and this next one, and then we've won the fight. And the healer's just sitting there going, I've got all my cooldowns available, and I didn't have to use them because the tank is doing it all himself. And I think that a big problem could be, okay, the tanks were kind of muscling in on the DPS's territory with Vengeance, and now they could potentially start muscling in on the healer's territory with Resolve. And depending on how Blizzard balance it, that could become a big problem.
I could see that. I would definitely say that I would worry that they might become too powerful. I think for the most part, though, they're going to manage it with appropriate cooldowns. Like, there's no one that's going to have a really good spammable self-heal. The Death Knight might, but I don't know Death Knight cooldowns and how they're going to be affected whenever Warlords drops. But in the case of the Brewmaster, their primary one is Expel Harm right now. Expel Harm is on a 20-something second cooldown. So as an example, if they keep the cooldowns on a lower end without making them too low, then that will, if a burst, from what I'm looking at how the mechanics are working in Warlords, there's not going to be a spot where 4 seconds of burst is all you have to worry about with fights. It looks like it's going to be much more consistent in the realm of personal responsibility. I don't imagine we'll have a tank that can, at least in the raids, keep themselves alive without requiring the use of anyone else, let alone keep the rest of the group alive at the same time.
Right.
Since it is all self-healing, I'm not too worried about it muscling in on the healer's territory. All they're doing is lightening their load, which makes them more available to help the rest of the group, which is far more beneficial than any amount of DPS a tank would put out.
Right, yeah. And I think that Resolve is certainly going to be interesting. I think it might open up some strategic avenues for the tank, but really we're just going to have to wait and see how it pans out and what the gear does to tanks and their cooldowns. But we've been talking for a while now, so I think it might be a good time to start wrapping it up. But before we do that, I think it may be a good idea to offer some suggestions to the tanks out there as to what they can expect and what they can do to prepare themselves for this change. Because, as we've said, tanking is going to change dramatically, and if tanks rush, they're going to die. And they're going to be rage quitting out of the 5-man pugs. They're going to be dropping out of the roles, potentially, if they can't keep up with these changes and how to play around them. So really, let's say you're just a tank that does a bit of everything. Let's say you intend to get into raiding eventually, and you'll get to that point and you'll do some normal or heroic, as it's going to be called in Warlords, raiding, but you're also going to be doing LFRs, and you're also going to be pugging 5-mans when Warlords releases. So what can someone like that expect, and what should they do, more importantly, to help them basically survive through the changes?
What they can do to help them with all of this is the same thing that anyone can do, is general information gathering, both about your class and about the content you're going to do. Look a few things up if possible. Read through the dungeon journal. That will, if you can read through the dungeon journal and retain some of that information on the fights before you even go into the battle, before you even go into the instance, it will be beneficial to you. Know what you're expecting. Keep an eye out for what's going on. Learn. It's a lot of trial and error as well. Learn what's dangerous. Learn what's not. One of the most beneficial things you can possibly do is understand this is a social game. The best way to help yourself move forward without frustrating yourself or putting yourself in a situation you don't want to be in is to control everything you can. If you have friends, play with friends. If you don't have as many friends or guildies as you'd like, try to find a social atmosphere that is beneficial to you. That is the best way to ensure you have as much fun and you are as well prepared for all of the changes that you could possibly look for.
Agreed. I would definitely say the biggest and most important aspect of the game is the social part of it. I mean, when Warlords of Draenor's appeal is lost and we're grinding away and doing the raids and all that, it will be the people that keep us coming back. And if you've got people like that around you at the moment, plan with them. Say, okay, maybe near the end of the first day of release, we can gather together and do the first 5-man. And if you can get a non-pug going for the first time you go into every instance so that you can learn and die together, we call it in Legion of the Seraphim, that's our guild, we call it learning with our face. That's the first time we progress on a boss, we say, let's learn with our face, and we charge in and die. That's what we do. And then we say, what killed us? Let's work past it. And you can do that in a 5-man. And really, a 5-man isn't going to have so many mechanics that you're going to be in there for an age. And you can just work past it as a group. And if you can get a non-pug going for the first time you do every instance and every heroic, you'll be golden. But if you do have to pug some people, make sure you communicate with them. Let them know, hey, we're probably going to die. If we die, we'll work past it. That's how we'll figure this out. Because there are going to be people, regardless of how many people you spread any kind of message to, there will be people that go into Warlords of Draenor and try and tank, try and heal, try and DPS as they do now, and they will get their asses stomped into the ground. And they will be frustrated. They will blame you. They'll blame themselves. They'll blame Blizzard. They'll blame their cat, whatever they can. And you have to be prepared for that. So again, play with people that know what they're doing. Play in a social atmosphere where you can learn together, and it will be... That's the best way. I think that's the best way to prepare yourself for the tanking changes in Warlords, is to play with other people.
There's going to be a lot to learn, and learning it with friends softens the blow considerably.
It also makes it much more fun.
Oh, heavens yes.
Because you can play a terrible game with friends and it can become awesome. So World of Warcraft is not a terrible game. You'll enjoy it much more if you play it with friends.
Precisely.
So that will wrap up today's daily discussion. Thank you very much for coming in and having a chat with me, Ellie.
No, I was happy to. It's a good time.
Indeed, and hopefully if you guys like Ellie, we can have him back on the show in the future. If you don't like him, let me know and I'll send all your hate towards him, but please be nice to him.
I can take it. I'm a big boy.
Yes. So that will conclude today's daily discussion. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any suggestions for topics or you wish to send me your questions to answer on the daily discussion, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck with your gaming endeavors.
I have to manage my energy when attempting to use Expel Harm, because if I drop too low, I can spam it, but I lost where I was going, so I have to manage. Tell you what. Fuck that idea.